Go ahead and call this subcommittee meeting of the Military Personnel Subcommittee to order. I want to welcome everyone to the hearing of the Military Personnel Subcommittee to receive views on how best to ensure future military medical readiness. This hearing is part of the committee's ongoing project to comprehensively review the current state of the military health system and military health care, and based on this information, identify areas that need improvement. Our purpose today is to discuss the top priority of the military health system to ensure the medical readiness of our military forces while also ensuring a ready medical force prepared to deploy in support of combat operations. Over the past 14 years of conflict, the services have worked tirelessly to improve medical readiness, ensuring both service members and medical providers are able to deploy and accomplish their missions. The medical readiness rates for each of the services has seen double-digit growth as commanders and healthcare providers work together to identify and eliminate barriers to deployability. Combat medicine has also seen extraordinary advances, resulting in service member survival rates that were once thought unachievable. In many areas, the standards of care have been redefined as advances in areas ranging from transfusion medicine to casualty transport care reshape combat medicine. These crucial advances have not only benefited the military, but civilian medicine as well. Many of these advances were made possible by the tireless efforts of military practitioners. Even in peacetime, military healthcare providers have the complex job of maintaining the medical readiness of service members at home stations while also manning, equipping, and deploying medical units with medical personnel who are trained in both military skills and specialized medical skills needed for wartime medicine. The hard-fought advances in combat care over the past 14 years must be preserved. The medical specialties needed during war are not limited to trauma. However, during periods of limited deployment, trauma skills can quickly degrade, which is why we must do everything possible to maintain proficiency in both trauma and emergency medicine. It is crucial that military trauma teams have the proper patient volume and case complexity during times of limited deployment so that they can maintain the skills needed in combat. We'll hear today from two panels. The first panel, consisting of the Joint Staff Surgeon and Service Deputy Surgeons Generals, who can provide valuable insights regarding service-wide initiatives, and the second panel, comprised of practitioners, who can provide perspectives on the current challenges facing military emergency medicine and trauma practitioners. I look forward to hearing from our panels about the current efforts underway by the services to ensure we maintain high service member readiness and provider readiness during periods of limited deployment. In addition, I'm interested to hear how the services ensure medical providers maintain their specialties, particularly in areas where patient volume is limited. Finally, I look forward to hearing the challenges facing practitioners as they look for innovative ways to maintain proficiency during periods of limited deployment. Before I introduce our panel, let me offer the ranking member, Ms. Davis, an opportunity to make her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to welcome our witnesses from both of our panels this morning. This hearing should afford us the opportunity to hear a variety of perspectives on medical readiness. And as you all know very, very well, nothing that we have to tell you, medical readiness is the foundation for which the military services medical systems are built. Not just the readiness of service members who are trained and proficient, but also the readiness of the providers who ensure those service members are always fit to perform their mission. So much of the discussion on medical readiness has been focused on trauma specialties in combat and how to maintain the skills the medical community has gained over the last 15 years of persistent conflict. I'm interested to follow up on the discussion in your written statements about the development of the essential medical capabilities, as well as how each of the services maintains visibility over provider readiness to ensure that we have the proper number of trained providers when needed, and how you manage the trauma specialties, trying to track that. And I think for all of us who are not immersed in this in the way that you are every single day, understanding how that really occurs is going to be important as well. I also want to acknowledge and thank the chairman for mentioning the contribution to civilian medicine that our armed services have made, that the medical providers have made to our country. Staggering and incalculable, and I appreciate that greatly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. We are joined again today by two outstanding panels. We'll give each witness the opportunity to present his or her testimony and each member an opportunity to question the witnesses. I would respectfully remind the witnesses to summarize to the greatest extent possible the high points of your written testimony in 5 minutes. The lighting system will be green. At 1 minute remaining, it'll turn yellow. When it turns red, I ask you to quickly try to summarize and finish up your testimony so we can move on through. Let me welcome our first panel. Major General Joseph Caravalho, Joint Staff Surgeon, Office of the Chairman of the Joint's Chief of Staff. Major General Dorothy Hogg, Deputy Surgeon General, United States Air Force. Brigadier General Robert Tenhet, Deputy Surgeon General, United States Army. And Rear Admiral Terry Moulton, Deputy Surgeon General of the United States Navy. I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. With that, Major General Caravalho, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And I'm especially grateful for the opportunity to discuss medical readiness with you today. My written testimony has been submitted for the record. Today, I would like to highlight 3 points in my oral testimony. However, as this is my first opportunity to meet with this committee in my capacity as a Joint Staff Surgeon, I'd like to first take a moment to tell you about my role. Essentially, I have the responsibility to provide the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other senior leaders with best military medical advice in support of the Joint Force. In my role as the facilitator for global medical synchronization, I work with other Joint Staff Directorates, the Service Surgeons General, and the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs to meet the Chairman's intent in delivering health services to the combatant commanders and the Joint Force. Now, first of all, I'd like to say I'm extremely proud of the accomplishments to date of the Joint Medical Force across a full spectrum of military operations. And with the Chairman's vision of future security environments, my first point is military medicine must be better aligned to continually demonstrate its readiness posture to the department's senior leaders. It is my observation the Joint Force expects military medicine to be more than interoperable and at times more than joint. I believe whenever and wherever feasible, while remaining cognizant of service responsibilities, to best support the Joint Force, the service's medical forces must be interchangeably aligned. The Chairman's recently published Joint Concept for Health Services moves us in that direction. Now, this document describes in broad terms the Chairman's vision for what the future Joint Force will need from military medicine to support globally integrated operations. To this end, the services have begun work on establishing core medical specialty requirements that will aid in creating a more interchangeable joint medical force. Readiness metrics will then reflect each medical specialty's ability to function across a full spectrum of military operations. Next, I have also observed an increasing number of requests for medical support to smaller, more widely dispersed ground forces. Now, I expect this trend to continue. With this, my second point is the medical community must adapt to new paradigms of health service support. To meet this challenge, we have already begun work towards a formalized and disciplined review to develop new organizations, training, policies, and doctrine. My third point is I view military medical centers, hospitals, and clinics as our home stations' front lines of care. They provide ready warfighters and medical forces alike, while delivering quality health care to our valued beneficiaries. Then, both during and following deployments, they offer continued high-quality care for those in need. Now, these platforms should not be compared directly to civilian healthcare facilities, as we are focused primarily on readiness. In conclusion, military medicine has but one mission, and that is to support the Joint Force with globally integrated health services. We will not lose focus on the world-class healthcare our service members and families deserve, but it will be performed in support of our primary mission of medical readiness. From home station to operational deployments to evacuation and post-deployment settings, I feel strongly the military medical team across all the services will remain relevant, adaptive, and highly valued members of the Joint Force. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee and for your enduring support of our service members and their families.
Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today to discuss the future of Air Force medical readiness. Fielding ready medics is the key to providing world-class healthcare at home and in the deployed environment. Let me illustrate this point. Last week, Craig Joint Theater Hospital in Afghanistan admitted a NATO patient suffering from adult respiratory distress syndrome. The patient ultimately needed extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, and aeromedical evacuation to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. While awaiting evacuation, the patient's oxygen levels decreased rapidly, leading to a life-threatening irregular heart rate, resulting in advanced cardiac life support and kidney dialysis. Craig's critical care medical team jumped into action to stabilize the patient and prep him for immediate evacuation. The complexities of this emergency illustrates the medical readiness skills required of our medics in managing not only trauma patients, but non-trauma patients as well. This level of readiness is achieved through caring for complex patients with similar disease etiologies in our military health system. Every Air Force military treatment facility is a medical readiness platform aligned with an operational wing that directly enhances the medical readiness of warfighters and their families. The care we provide our beneficiaries enables us to sustain the readiness of our medical force, and our readiness is directly related to the volume, diversity, and acuity of our patient population. The Air Force Medical Service has a broad portfolio of readiness training programs to prepare individual medical specialists and deployable medical teams for reliable performance across the full range of military operations. The readiness portfolio spans care provided within our MTFs to specialized advanced trauma training delivered in our civilian Level 1 trauma partnership platforms. Our Readiness Skills Verification Program establishes baseline skills required in a deployed environment. These skills are identified by senior clinical consultants and enlisted functional area managers based on combatant commanders' requirements and are updated with lessons learned and emerging medical evidence. In tandem, the Sustained Medical and Readiness Trained, or SMART program, expands training opportunities for skills requiring a higher volume and complexity of hands-on care than normally seen in our smaller military treatment facilities, utilizing local training affiliations or regional currency sites, such as the University Medical Center in Las Vegas, Nevada. For well over a decade, we have also had cadres of physicians, nurses, and technicians embedded in our Centers for Sustainment of Trauma and Readiness Skills, known as CSTARS, located in Baltimore, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. Hundreds of our medics have received elite trauma and critical care training and remain prepared to deploy anytime, anywhere. Similarly, Air Force graduate medical education programs develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of highly qualified medical personnel while supporting the Air Force Medical Service missions. These training programs deliver health care to our military members and other beneficiaries, ensures the competency and currency of medical personnel, and contributes to the readiness of medical airmen. The Air Force Medical Service is committed to preserving the medical skills attained in the last 15 years of conflict and will continue to meet the evolving requirements of combatant commanders. With your support, we will continue to provide trusted and reliable health services to our airmen and their families for years to come. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to provide the Army perspective on ensuring medical readiness now and into the future. Today's uncertain global environment continues to place high demands on the Army. Over the past year, the Army deployed over 190,000 soldiers to more than 140 countries around the world in support of various operations. Readiness is the Army's #1 priority. And as Ranking Member Davis mentioned earlier, our trained and ready medical force contributed to the highest survivability rate in the history of warfare, despite the increasing severity of battle injuries. These advances in combat casualty care are primarily due to the integrated system of health that currently extends from the battlefield through Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany to our inpatient hospitals in the United States. Today, we are faced with the question of how to sustain the competency of our medical force, which has performed so well in the past 14+ years. During the second panel, you'll hear from 2 combat-tested Army physicians, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Mabry an emergency medical physician and certified pre-hospital physician specialist, and Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Claude de la Ronde, an Army trauma orthopedic surgeon who will discuss challenges in pre-hospital care as well as maintaining surgical skills. However, we must not focus exclusively on the sustainment of combat trauma, surgery, and burn capabilities. Our Army and soldiers must be prepared for a multitude of contingency missions to engage in conventional conflict against large armies and smaller, as mentioned by our Joint Surgeon, defend the homeland, and respond to a wide range of crises ranging from peacekeeping to disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. The Army must maintain a broad range of medical capabilities to support this full range of military requirements. 2014 deployment of 2,500 personnel to support Operation United Assistance in Liberia demonstrated the value of non-trauma related medical specialties. Some argue these examples are not part of our mission set for ready and relevant medical support, but invariably, when the task is unique and difficult, the nation leans on its military. To ensure the readiness of the entire medical team for this broad range of missions, we must maintain and sustain our medical centers, hospitals, and clinics as our readiness and training platforms. This system ensures our medical force is trained, ready, and relevant to provide primary and specialty care in the myriad settings and conditions faced around the world. We must continue to develop innovative partnerships with the VA, civilian hospitals, and other organizations to ensure our entire medical team continues to be exposed to a varied and complex mix of patients. This is essential to train, challenge, and to hone the skills of our entire medical team. In addition, we must continue to train the next generation of Army medicine team through our graduate medical education programs. These programs are vital to our ability to recruit and retain highly skilled medical providers. Most importantly, these programs are the primary means of transferring knowledge from this generation of military providers to the next. While our system has proven to be very successful over the last 14 years, we must continue to improve and evolve it to meet the challenging needs of our nation's Army. Since the beginning of our nation's history, when we send our nation's sons and daughters into harm's way, they need to know that the Army medicine is there, relevant, and ready. I am committed to ensuring we maintain and improve the readiness of our medical force. I look forward to working with Congress in this endeavor, and I want to thank my partners in the DoD, my colleagues here on the panel, and Congress for your continued support.
Good morning, Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to share some perspectives on Navy medicine and our most important strategic priority, medical readiness. We're grateful to the committee for your leadership and strong support of military medicine. Force health protection is the bedrock of Navy medicine. It's what we do and why we exist. And this mission spans the full spectrum of healthcare, from optimizing the health and fitness of the force to maintaining robust disease surveillance and prevention programs to saving lives on the battlefield. And on any given day, Navy medicine is underway and operating forward with the fleet and the Marine forces around the globe. We operate in all warfare domains, in all environments, and must also deliver important specialized capabilities to the warfighters. Our personnel, whether an independent duty corpsman, a flight surgeon, an undersea medical officer serving aboard a submarine, a ship, or squadron, or a fleet Marine Force corpsman in the field with a Marine unit, must be trained and equipped to execute their specific mission. Our readiness posture also requires us to be capable of meeting critical surge requirements in support of contingencies and combat operations, and Navy medicine's expedition medical capabilities are important as we provide that care through all the echelons of care, from the battlefield to the bedside of our military treatment facilities. This is clearly evident as Navy medicine continues to sustain unparalleled levels of mission success, competency, and professionalism while providing world-class trauma care and expeditionary force health protection to U.S. and coalition forces in southern Afghanistan. It also enables us to support humanitarian assistance and disaster response missions, since our hospital ships have the capability to provide relief in the wake of catastrophic events like tsunamis and earthquakes. And our global health engagement strategy requires us to be ready to support these diverse missions around the globe. I cannot overstate the importance of our military treatment facilities in ensuring readiness of our personnel. The ability to deliver the full range of medical capabilities to the operational commander is highly dependent on the training and clinical currency of our personnel, and our MTFs are critical to providing these skills and competencies and must remain foundational to meeting our current and future operational requirements. Navy Medicine also continues to leverage our strategic partnerships with leading civilian trauma centers so our personnel can hone and sustain their skills, including the Navy Trauma Center at LA and USC Medical Center. And this program has trained over 2,800 of our deploying medical personnel since 2002 and continues to enhance their combat trauma skills and medical readiness. It's also important to recognize that our GME programs, graduate medical education programs, at our medical centers and our family medicine teaching hospitals support readiness by providing trained physicians to meet our operational requirements. And these programs rely on our MTFs having access to a robust beneficiary populations and support our case number and complexity. The services, along with the Joint Staff and DoD, are working to identify, define, categorize, and prioritize essential medical capabilities, or EMCs. These refer to those health services that are required to deliver comprehensive health care in support of globally integrated operations and will provide the framework for maintaining the medical ready force. And the last 15 years of war has seen unprecedented advances in military medicine. And this progress was a result of highly trained and well-equipped force dedicated to rapidly employing the most effective life-saving skills and techniques. And all of us in military medicine are committed to ensuring the lessons learned are sustained and effectively implemented throughout the MHS. And we're committed to continuous improvement, and these efforts require rigorous ongoing assessment of our capabilities, identification of gaps, and implementation of sound solutions. And all of us recognize that there's hard work ahead for that, to maintain medical readiness moving forward. Again, thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
We thank you all for your testimony. We'll begin a 5-minute round of questioning by members. A recent study of military medical staff concluded that the military seems to understaff operationally required specialties and overstaffs specialties more towards providing beneficiary care. So I'd ask, how do the services balance maintaining that mix of having the docs needed, or the entire healthcare spectrum needed to take care of military beneficiaries or maintain their combat skills? And I would guess that part of the EMCs is going to help define that. For instance, you look at certain facilities and there seems to be an abundance of OBGYN and pediatrics, understanding that in humanitarian care we've got to be prepared to provide those things, but not necessarily the level or the number of specialists or specialties required to provide combat casualty care. So that would be my first question. And to follow on to that, when we try to maintain the level of training of, let's say, our teams that are going to provide combat casualty care, I think, General, you mentioned your SMART program, and I appreciate the shout out to University Medical Center, my former place of employment. But how do we ensure that the entire team, the anesthesiologist, the medic, the nurse, everybody is trained, as opposed to just rotating out the trauma surgeon to a level 1 trauma center? So whoever wants to tackle it first, we can just go down the line.
Yes, sir, I'll take that. So we need to maintain readiness not only of our active duty members, but of our families also. And the OBGYN and the pediatric care that we provide help us to maintain that family readiness so that when that active duty member is deployed, they have confidence and that their family will be taken care of. And also those specialties will provide some military medical readiness due to complications that might occur during those episodes of care. The ability to get the whole team trained can be challenging at times. Most of the specialty care that we get within the Air Force Medical Service, we rely on our civilian partners to help achieve that. And it is at their mercy whether they want us to come into their facility. There's nothing compelling them per se to partner with us. We do have some challenges with our technicians, our technical specialties, getting them into the civilian facilities because they are not equivalent. The civilian community doesn't really understand their equivalencies. Once we get them in the door, they are all on board and usually ask us, do you have more? And so we try by getting in the physician and the nurse, and then once we get them into our partnerships, we tag along a technician, and once they see the capabilities of our technicians, usually that helps.
Anybody else want to add? General?
I'll add to General Hogg's comments here. In a deployed setting, trauma care takes up about 15% of the numbers we see in theater. So 85% of those are disease non-battle injury. In any given camp or FOB, you may have upwards of 30% females. So just with the OB-GYN, gynecologists in theater is not a misnomer. Of the evacuations using the wonderful strat air that the Air Force has, 80% of our evacs are disease non-battle injury as well. So to sustain just within the trauma system itself, we've got to look across the entire spectrum of medicine. And as you talk about or ask the question on the OR piece, we estimate it takes up to 80 staff members to support one OR. So it becomes a convoluted system to try and train to standard using a team approach and collective training. So our forward surgical teams you're probably familiar with. We do take them into team training, collective training down at Ryder in Miami, and we're looking to expand that across the U.S. and maybe even globally as we go into the intra-war years.
Sir, I would just comment to your first question, about maintaining the balance. How do we ensure that we're meeting our operational requirements and then the peacetime care as well? And for us, there's priorities for distribution of our resources. First of all, we're going to support the operational requirements. That's 100% staffing, and then we look to our overseas activities, which are forward deployed, and then lastly is our MTFs, and then they're augmented by civilians and contractors to maintain that skill and to build that credibility before deploying again. And then the second question, back to the entire team, rather than just the trauma surgeons or surgeons in general, we are moving back to platform readiness. And for the last 15 years, we've been doing a lot of individual augmentations. So now moving back to platform readiness, we can train the whole unit. You will know where you were assigned. You will know what the training requirements are for that platform, and then you will train as a team before deployment.
Okay, thank you all. My time has expired. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to go back just to the EMCs, the essential medical capabilities, for a second. When that obviously you've been working on very hard, I think, but when do you expect to complete them, and how long will it take to implement across the individual force?
Yes, ma'am. So we are, the Air Force Medical Service supports the development of the EMCs, and we have been actively engaged in defining what those are. The time frame, we will have the beginnings of some essential medical capabilities, I believe, in October of this year. And then the implementation, right now, we haven't got the timeline for that.
Ma'am, if I may say that the EMCs are primarily going to describe what's already being done by the services now, except that they're using the civilian healthcare model of are you board certified, are you credentialed, licensed, and privileged. The EMCs is going to put it, I believe, is going to be very helpful because they'll put it into the DoD reporting system style so that now senior leaders can say, are my medics ready, just like are my submariners ready and are my aviators ready. Mm-hmm. It will speak, I think it will speak to it won't be too high level, it won't be strategic in that take care of patients, of which everything falls down within, and it won't be too tactical to say, what do our ophthalmologists do and what do our cardiologists do? So it's going to be along the lines of providing hospitalization, providing patient movement, providing something along those lines, under which then the essential task list will be generated by the services, and the primary skills, attributes that everyone will need. And I believe each provider will then be able to say, regardless of my specialty as an NCO or as an officer, what do I bring to this fight? So it may be, I may not be a general surgeon, but I will be asked to be a surgeon. What are the skills I will need to be a surgeon in any realm that I'm asked to participate, whether major combat operations, humanitarian assistance, or what have you. I think that's how that's going to play out. I think we'll start to be, as was mentioned, start to be able to codify that in a department's reporting system later this year.
And do you think, I mean, you've pretty much described this right now, I think, that, do you see a major impact on training requirements then? Is that really going to?
I think we're going to, we're not going to create a new system. I think we already, I think the services already know proficiency and currency using the peer review, the systems that civilian healthcare industry uses. We're just going to codify it and report it so that the senior leaders know that no matter what I ask you to do, a fight tonight, sustain operation, are you able to do? Are you able to fight? I'm hoping then that whether they ask for Army or Navy or Air Force, no matter what the chairman is looking for, it won't matter because we're using the same codified skill sets. And if we're truly interchangeable and one service is short a surgeon, for instance, if using EMCs, we can look to another service and say, okay, you've met the standard, can you come in and fill? As opposed to it must be all Army or all Navy or all Air Force for every time there's a requirement.
Yeah, and can you, could you all respond? I mean, how does that make a real difference for you?
So when we get into the KSAs, so you build the EMCs, that's the overarching codification of this, and we're looking at 10 primarily at this point in time. We haven't solidified that yet, but that's where I think we're going to go with this. Oh, by the way, mirrors into the joint concept of health support. So that's process and progress in that model. But concomitant with the EMC is the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we're aligning across the services. And that gets into both the operational and down to the tactical level of the individual. So within that construct, it's going to be a scorecard, just like the infantry uses in their unit status reporting. Are they green, amber, or red? We're going to apply that to medicine.
Yeah. But is this going to be on an individual basis then? Will you know whether one specific physician is ready?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes,
And,
ma'am.
and is that true that you don't know today?
No, ma'am, we do know today. In the Air Force Medical Service we have, I mentioned in my oral statement about the Readiness Skills Verification Program, that every medic in the Air Force Medical Service has a Readiness Skills Verification checklist, if you will, that identifies the skills that are necessary for them to be competent in wartime scenarios or over the full range of military operations. That is looked at on a regular basis. Some of the training is knowledge-based, some of the training is didactic, and some of the training is hands-on. And they are required to complete those skills depending on the timeline in order to stay current.
But in terms of once this is operational, I understand it's not new to the system, but there is added value to it.
Yes, ma'am. If I may give an example of where we're short now, if you have a general surgeon who goes on to a fellowship and does plastic surgery, and now she's practicing as a plastic surgeon for 10 years, when we deploy her, we'll need her as a general surgeon, and she may never have been in someone's belly operating for 10 or 15 years. We track her as a competent, board-certified, credential privileged plastic surgeon, and we lose sight of the general surgery part. EMCs will say, no matter where you are, when you deploy, have you met the skills and attributes we are looking for in a deployed setting?
Okay, great. And for our specialty nurses, just a yes or no, is it going to be the same?
Yes, ma'am, it is the same.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Not sure to whom I should address this question, but I'm interested in the IDES, or the Integrated Disability Evaluation System. that is supposed to ensure that a wounded or disabled service member is either reintroduced back into active duty or the appropriate reserve component, or is able to seamlessly transition out into VA medical care. And following the flow chart that the Department of Defense has published, it looks like that process should take about 295 days. So I guess my first question is, are we in fact returning service members to active duty status in that time, or helping them to separate in that time with a VA disability rating? Or are we at some other mark either above or below 295?
Yes, sir. In the Air Force system, IDIS system, it is a collaborative process between DoD and VA, and parts of those process are owned by those two entities. In the part that the Air Force owns, the Air Force Medical Service owns, we are doing actually very well with getting members through. But the total process still is a little bit over the 295 days.
Do you know what it is for the Air Force?
No, sir, I'd have to
Okay,
get back to you
maybe
with that.
for the record and for anyone else, if anyone has a specific number, I'd love to hear it now. If not, we would just request that as a follow-up question for the record. General Tenhet, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to mention, we're at 291. However, the Army's injuries, we have some complex issues that keep that number around that window there. Working with the VA, we've improved that significantly in the last 4 to 5 years, and some of that's been from the pressure from Congress to work more collaboratively together, and also as being able to share the documentation through Legacy Viewer, et cetera. Any and all medical interaction is now documented and shared across both the VA and DoD.
That gets to a follow-up question I'd like to ask you, which is, I don't know how to gauge whether 295 is a lot of time or the appropriate amount of time, but there are certainly several stages, dozens of stages actually in this process, some of which the service member has the opportunity to appeal a decision or make some other decision on his or her part, and then decisions that are made by the Department of Defense, decisions that are made by the VA. Do you see any obvious opportunities to further streamline this process, gain greater efficiencies, and ensure that the service member returns to duty or is able to transition out effectively and be in the care, again, effectively of the VA so that nothing is dropped?
There's always room for improvement as a learning organization. The medicine piece of that window is actually a very small piece. It's mostly administrative. And I think all the services medically are meeting their mark. I think the coordination with the VA and working with our G1 through the administrative piece of this, we can always continue to tighten that piece up. But it's back on the soldier. 50% of those just 2 years ago were being returned to service. We're down to about 40%, again, because of the remaining complex issues that we have. But the ability to work with the VA, the warm handoff, and also implementing the case management structure into this has really enhanced the program.
I have another question that may, because of limited time for you to answer, be appropriate to get for the record or to have an offline conversation. But in terms of that warm handoff, anecdotally, in talking to veterans in El Paso who served at Fort Bliss and were treated at William Beaumont Army Medical Center, they talk about excellent care at the military treatment facility, especially when it comes to mental health. They then say that regimen of care, which was so expertly executed at William Beaumont, once I transitioned to the VA, it's very hard to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or even a social worker to continue that care. So I understand the goal. It's not happening. Would love, and there's not time for you to respond right now, but I would love to get your thoughts either in writing or offline about how we can do a better job and what role specifically the Army or Department of Defense could play in extending that care if somebody's already in treatment. With that, I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have some basic questions. You know, in California, we've opened another medical school out there because of the low deficiency for surgeons and doctors that we have in California and across the country. Are we finding that in Army and Navy and Air Force medicine, that we're not getting enough applicants, that we're not having enough surgeons and doctors?
No, sir. We staff to our requirements, and so we typically have plenty of applicants to attend our military medical programs.
And for the Navy, I would say as well, our recruiting efforts have been very successful over the last several years. So we're not facing any shortages there.
Same for the Army, sir. I think our challenge is the retention piece of this, especially as the wars start to wane, especially in the trauma medicine arena. The retention portion of this becomes more challenging as we go forward.
Okay, and as we've been at war now for 15 years and for some purposes for the last 25 years, we've seen readiness be the #1 goal, and I think that should always be the #1 goal in the military is readiness. But as our young men and women have gone into theater 2, 3, 4, 5 times, we have started to see an awful lot of things that maybe we dealt with in other wars, maybe in Vietnam and Korea and World War II, but they're very prevalent today. We've renamed these things. I think in World War II we named it shell shock, and today we have PTSD and traumatic brain and things like that. They're all an effect of seeing something that normal people don't ever want to see, and that affects someone. How are we treating that differently today than maybe we did 15 or 20 years ago?
Yes, sir. I think that the biggest way that we are treating that differently is recognizing that it does exist and that it does have an effect on our members coming back from being exposed to those kinds of circumstances. We certainly have increased our mental health care, and we continually look to practice evidence-based medicine in relationship to PTSD and TBI, and we continue to care for those individuals coming back.
I'll just add to the comments. I think just admitting that we do have these problems, Congress supporting the efforts, $184 million in the last 15 years in research. We're working with the NCAA, the NFL with their programs, making tremendous strides there. I think it's 450 research programs ongoing right now just in our Medical Research and Material Command.
Admiral?
I was just going to also just talk about the partnerships that we've had reaching out to UCLA and our NICO and really approaching it across the system, vice in isolated areas. So I think we're making good strides in that.
And just in my last minute here, recently I've sat down with some folks that are working on new and innovative ways of treating our folks on the battlefield. Some of them are these bandages where you can see if they are actually healing or if it's not healing and things of that nature, and under the skin type of treatments that we can check and we can monitor if it is working or if it's not working or if the skin is healing or not healing. Have we seen that because we've been at war in the last 15 years more, or is that just because we're getting more and more advanced in the medical field?
I'll take that one too. It's both. It's both. I think that as you are exposed to situations and you deliver care, you're always thinking about, could I do this better? And if so, how could I do that better? So our research programs are helping us to look at those specific care issues and figure out how could we do it better to improve the survivability of our warfighters downrange. So I think it's both. It's technology, it's advancing, and we're able to capitalize on that, but the care that we're providing downrange and the kinds of things that we're seeing causes us to look inside and go, could we do that better?
Thank you, General. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you all being here today. I want to talk a little bit about how some of the process of implementing the things that we want to see as far as keeping the skill levels up and credentialing that, et cetera. And as we know, so much of our military medicine is in the reserve component, and so not quite as captive an audience to check all these boxes, if you will. And for example, I spent time with CCAT in Cincinnati. I thank the Air Force for letting an Army guy go in there and participate in that. But great training, pre-deployment training, and you really have to qualify to be able to go and serve on that mission. And I think when I was there, everyone was active duty. They could be reservist as well to come into that scenario. But by and large, too, so I served a year in Iraq at a cache, and in the OR, I was the only one there for a year, and you had others rotating in 90 days. For some, it was been there, done that. You know, not the first time, they got it. For a young surgeon coming in, it was like, holy cow, I've never seen anything like this. I've never done anything like this. And even in the reserve component, as you mentioned, General, we have general surgeons that may be doing plastics. But you know what? At that time, that didn't matter. You're going to do this. And so how do we get the reserve component in particular to be able to check all these boxes, make sure that they're ready, and do we have enough surgeons to fill that void? Anyone?
In the Air Force Medical Service, the training that we provide is opened up to the total force. So the reserves and the Guard can attend C-STARS, they can attend SMART. They have the same requirements that we have as far as our readiness skills verification program to maintain competencies and currency. The professional medics in the reserve, the physicians, the nurses, a little less concerning as far as competency, because oftentimes they're practicing in their specialties. Yeah, where we have a challenge is with our enlisted medics, because oftentimes they are not practicing within their specialty. And so they have a very robust program to, during their annual trainings and whatnots, to try to get them up to speed.
Thank you.
Sir, the intent is, I believe, for the EMCs is that it's going to be across all compos. We shouldn't have an active duty standard and a reserve component standard. But I acknowledge that it's going to be difficult on your battle assembly to get after some of these things. So we may face an individual who doesn't have the right clinical mix, acuity, caseload to meet an EMC type standards. I'm hoping that even across the board, we're going to say, if you can't get it clinically, what are the reasonable facsimiles that you can then show your proficiency and currency? Online training, modeling, partnering, strategic partnering, civilian or VA entities. I think if we do this correctly, when you mobilize a reservist, you must institute time, and we've done this with this war. We've learned that you gotta provide some time to kind of get their mind into you're going to see not just a gunshot wound, not just a knife wound, but you're going to see blast injury, head injury, and a gunshot wound and a knife wound at the same time, and a burn. That's number one. So the Miami's, the Cincinnati trainings of the world before you deploy is going to be critical. The second thing is there's got to be a critical mass of expertise resident when the individuals show up. In other words, we have been successful, I believe, with one burn center in San Antonio rather than a burn center at every facility to ensure everyone has burn center skills. And you rotate staff through there that one person, whether it's a nurse or tech or doc, can say, this is the burn standard, everybody get on board. And I think we're going to have to use those types of creative skills to ensure that folks who may not be ready will get ready, because we know on the back end they want to be ready. So when they're willing, it doesn't take long for them to get on board.
So maybe that can be their AT?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you allowing me to testify or talk before the committee. My background is SEALs, and I've seen the evolution of casualty care, which has been impressive. I still remain a little concerned about the acquisition part. I don't think we're as fast as the private sector is at getting new techniques to the front. But my question really is about the training. Looking back at my career with explosive breaching and TBI, and looking at what's happened in the NFL, and all of a sudden an awareness of concussions over a period of time. I remember as a SEAL going into facilities, and we would do 400 explosive breaches in a day, and then do it continuously. What are we doing to examine our training regimen based on what we know today, to make sure that we aren't creating, situations, like long-term concussion damage, TBI, in our training regimen? Are we looking at it actively? Do we need to put more resources in it? What can we do to make sure that it's being done? Because oftentimes, the pipey, what I call the meat eaters, the frontline guys don't pay a lot of attention to the support folks. I want to make sure that they do, and what do we need to do to make sure that happens? Admiral?
Sir, I'd have to take that. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that enough to talk intelligently about it.
Sure.
Got to look at the force structure piece of this as well. So as we're looking at medicine and ensuring we sustain skills as we go forward, the intra-war years, the innovation that comes from some of that, applying this, we're not going to have the capability. This is just Bob Tenhet speaking about the future, where I see it going. We're not going to have that capability at our smaller facilities to have the high complex, high acuity type patients going into those facilities. And we've already taken steps just at Fort Sill, Knox, and Jackson in removing our surgeons and using the surrounding capabilities there in the community areas, and actually moving those surgeons to higher acuity platforms, our health readiness platforms. We're going to have to see more of that as we go forward to ensure that we have the training capability. And I would tell you, it's even a challenge at some of the places we're moving them to look at high complexity, high acuity cases as well. So I think the sharing agreements, working with the civilian populace, and I mentioned earlier, even looking at international programs, we may have to go there, because the Miamis, there's only so many of those that exist out there. So you're looking at individual skills, and you're also looking at the collective skills training.
Yeah, I guess my point is that there's a lot of preventative things that we should be doing up front, rather than wait until it's an acute problem. And especially with explosive breaching, I assume it's getting very similar to going into a boxing match. So I just want to make sure we get ahead of it so we don't have the problems long term. General?
Yes, sir. With the recent collaboration that we have with the sports industry and the academy, I feel that we will definitely start to see some of those changes coming out of those studies that will inform us on how to better prepare and to prevent these kinds of injuries.
Sir, in my experience with you carnivores, I agree that generally they don't like to listen to medical. And our approach has been, it's easy to be hard, but hard to be smart. What I'm excited about Readiness nowadays is that we're following some of the soft truths that they're talking about, that you can't recreate someone overnight. So how do you keep someone in the fight for the duration of his or her career, and then offer a full life after that career? So we're getting smarter in our training. The warfighters are bringing us in on board to help them understand how to do it right. And we are focusing as well on how do we prevent illness and how do we promote wellness so that you are survivable, agile, and resilient during your time in the military.
Well, certainly, if we can do anything to promote some interest and move in that direction, let us know. And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I'd like to follow up on the questions that Congressman Zink just had offered up. There is a wealth of information about chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It is not the NFL that is researching it. The NFL is trying to sweep it under the rug. Boston University has now, I think, examined the brains of, I don't know, maybe 100 persons who were in some in the military, but most in sports. There is a Dr. Amalu, who is the coroner who first kind of identified CTE, that is doing research now with a physician at USC on PET scans of persons who are alive. And they've just done a number of PET scans on veterans. And each PET scan they did showed CTE. One of the problems is it's not just the concussions, it's the subconcussive hits that individuals receive. And I really think it's incumbent on us to start to do a much better job of identifying it and promoting research in this area as it relates to those who serve in the military. And I'm kind of surprised and a little bit stunned that you haven't already undertaken this. I was told by someone very recently that SEALs now are actually wearing a monitor to determine how many, I don't know if they're concussions or just hits that they receive. Could someone speak to that?
Ma'am, in my last, one of my last jobs in the medical research community, we were working with DARPA, and there were blast gauges and different types of devices that one could place on across their body and on their helmet that would look at it was an accelerometer to get a sense if there was a rapid deceleration, and that would then codify how many events you had, knowing that our troopers in general don't want to say, "Coach, take me out," so they will not complain of these hits. That's number one. Number two is IED-related TBI probably represents less than 20% of all TBI that at least the Army is seeing. So most of it is just in normal training, whether it's combatives or parachute jumping or just normal Army training. I think you're right that longitudinally we need to understand these concussive and subconcussive events and its effect over time. And the military is also looking at doing pathologic studies of CT. I cannot speak to PET scanning or pre-mortem studies as you described, but we have a keen interest in that in the department, and we certainly want to partner with any academic center in getting after this. We don't care who finds out what the answer is. We want to get after the answer.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Well, I want to thank you all for your testimony here today. Again, the purpose for this hearing is that as we undertake the reformation of the military healthcare system, we want to make sure that we keep readiness first and foremost in our minds, and that we don't impede, one, the readiness of our military medical providers, but certainly that we don't hinder the medical readiness of our troops. So again, we thank you very much. Certainly, Ms. Davis.
Thank you. Thank you all again for being here. I wanted to clarify a little bit because we were talking about moving physicians into civilian facilities and back and forth, and I understand that's how important that is. We also know that a number of our military providers also moonlight for training. But if we're doing that, and as I understand it, you're basically managing that within individual services. Is that correct? So don't we need a more centralized way to manage that and to be able to identify the different skill sets that you're using, where you have a lot of movement of those providers, of those physicians.
Yes, ma'am. I think as we define those essential military capabilities, we will be able to partner with our other services where we're co-located to utilize those civilian facilities. The providers that we send there, not all of them are there full-time all the time. Some are there as their primary duty in that civilian facility, but many of them, again, go back and forth. So they provide outpatient care in the MTF, the military treatment facility, but then provide the specialty care because it's not available in the MTF in the civilian facility. But I do believe that as we define what those essential medical capabilities are, we will find opportunities where we could collaborate in that area as well.
Ma'am, I would also add, we are doing that in what we call multi-service markets, where we're working together in a multi-hospital system or multi-clinic system where there are larger populations, so we can bring in those kind of cases for us. And then are we adequately staffing, or what is that number of providers that are to be in that area so that they get the amount of workload for their training? And then we look at more partnerships with the VA or more partnerships with our private sector. So we are doing some of that.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad. Sometimes it seems as if, maybe culture, what have you, that there are obstacles to doing that. And if that's the ideal, and again, looking to all of you, is that ideal? Is that much better that there is that information sharing so that we know that someone is at the proficiency level required? And if it's in the Army, but you don't know it in the Navy, it's not going to do all of us any good, right? So, okay, great. I'm glad that's at least moving. Thank you very much.
Great. Again,
Thank you,
I thank
Mr. Chairman.
I thank the first panel for your participation today, and if we can now, we'll just swap out panels and continue to move forward. I'd now like to welcome our second distinguished panel. We heard from I think the 30,000-foot view. Now we're going to bring it down to a little bit more tactical and operational. With us this morning is Colonel Linda Lawrence, Special Assistant to the Air Force Surgeon General for Trusted Care Transformation, Office of the Air Force Surgeon General, but also past President of the American College of Emergency Physicians. Lieutenant Colonel Promotable Robert Mabry, who's here as Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellow with the U.S. House Committee on Energy and Commerce, but has a long and distinguished past beginning as an SF medic, and Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Claude, Chief of Orthopaedic Traumatology Service at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us this morning. Colonel Lawrence, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today to discuss the future of Air Force medical service readiness. I'm a residency-trained emergency medicine physician with over 23 years of active duty service in a variety of positions such as academics, clinical leadership, 5 years as the Air Force Surgeon General, emergency medicine consultant, and in multiple command assignments, including command positions in the deployed environment. As an emergency physician, you learn early it takes more than your own individual skills to be successful. I like to look at medical readiness from a tiered approach. The basics are individual skills, which we assess through our Readiness Skills Verification Program. For an emergency physician, these involve many procedural skills, common for resuscitation of patients, both medical and surgical, which ideally includes a daily practice environment that provides access to sick and critically ill patients. Next tier would be how we come together as teams, for which an emergency physician, we have multiple deployable unit type codes that are found throughout the echelons of care. Just as any sports team of all-star athletes cannot be a winning team unless they practice together, the same analogy applies for our medical teams. On our deployable teams, we need to have skills around a common set of standards or guidelines which drive processes where every member of the team knows their role as well as the role of others. We begin to build that capability or teamwork skills through processes in our day-to-day work in our MTFs. Many think we need to see the same type of patients, for example, trauma patients, to build those skills. That's not true. We build them every time we come together as a team to perform a procedure, respond to a complication, or a resuscitation. Even actions of coordination of care and handoffs become critical skills. The best care can quickly be compromised by lack of shared processes, poor communication, and teamwork. Every day in our MTFs, we're constantly improving our processes, handoffs, and practicing the art of good communication and teamwork. Every patient engagement sustains the readiness of the medical force in an environment that promotes continuous learning and improvement. Our commitment to trusted care is based on a set of principles which promote high reliability and safety. These principles not only improve the care we deliver to our patients, but also improve the processes and skills we bring to the deployed environment. Beyond our daily roles in our MTFs, we need the opportunity to challenge and assess our individual and team skills, which is provided through platforms like C-STARS and simulation. Through these training modalities, we can replicate some of the unique demands of the operational environment, reinforce the use of combat care clinical practice guidelines, and assess our performance as individuals and teams. This type of training is invaluable, and while it takes us away from supporting the 24/7 mission at our military treatment facilities we work in, it is the price of readiness. Finally, readiness is more than combat support. It includes global health engagement and the day-to-day work to maintain a medically ready force and ready medics. Every day, we support medical readiness in the care we deliver to our beneficiaries. I'm grateful for your support and the opportunity to speak with you today.
Phase 5 survival, improving battlefield. Very few clinical experts focused on care outside the hospital. Out of about 4,500 Army physicians, there are only 4 board-certified specialists in this field. Fourth, research and development. Our R&D efforts are focused on developing life-saving drugs and devices, yet very little research is done on the delivery system, or in other words, how do you get the right care to the right patient at the right time? Finally, culture. Our organizational culture is centered on caring for military beneficiaries in our fixed facilities. This is our biggest mission, yet it's our wartime mission that makes us unique and justifies our cost to the nation. I'd like to highlight these challenges by briefly telling the story of the simple tourniquet. The most effective thing a soldier can do to save another soldier's life on the battlefield is to stop bleeding. The strap and buckle tourniquet was first issued during the Civil War, then again in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. In 1993, I deployed to Mogadishu, Somalia as a Special Forces medic in one of the most well-equipped, well-trained units in the world with the strap and buckle tourniquet. We went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan with essentially the same tourniquet that was issued during the Civil War. There's only one problem with the strap and buckle tourniquet. It doesn't work. In 1945, Dr. Luther Wolf an incredibly experienced Army surgeon who cared for thousands of patients fighting across Europe, wrote an article in the Army Medical Department Journal describing how the strap and buckle tourniquet was ineffective and should be removed from the inventory. That was in 1945. Yet it remained in the inventory. Death rates from extremity hemorrhage in Korea and Vietnam range from 7 to 9%. That means that 7,000 sons, fathers, husbands, brothers lost their lives because they did not have an effective tourniquet. In the initial phase of Iraq and Afghanistan, our death rates from extremity hemorrhage were the same as the Korean War. In 2003, a Special Forces medic invented the Combat Applications Tourniquet. This new tourniquet worked well and was widely adopted by U.S. forces, driving down deaths from extremity injury to virtually nothing. Meanwhile, the strap and buckle tourniquet, first issued during the Civil War, noted not to work during World War II, was finally removed from the DoD inventory in 2008. How did this happen? How did the most advanced military in the world miss this? More so, how do we prevent something like this from happening again? Ownership, data, expertise, research, culture. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Heck, Ranking Member Davis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. During past conflicts, there have been delays in our ability to provide optimal care for our wounded, particularly when there have been many years since the previous conflict. These interwar years are typically associated with a decline in the funding and infrastructure of our trauma and rehabilitative systems, as well as a lack of training for our trauma surgeons. Senior surgeons with experience in combat injuries may no longer be in the military by the time the next conflict arises, and those that remain have most likely been struggling to maintain their skills in the peacetime environment. In order to adequately care for wounded warriors, trauma surgeons need two different skill sets. They need to be able to treat conventional trauma, such as the injuries seen in the civilian sector, and they also need to be able to treat combat-related trauma. Conventional trauma proficiency can be maintained with adequate exposure to civilian trauma by allowing surgeons and military hospitals to treat civilian patients and by facilitating the continuing medical education of trauma specialists. Combat-related trauma skills, however, can't be sustained during peacetime because injuries from explosions or machine guns are thankfully almost non-existent in our society. Therefore, our focus should not be on the sustainment of these skills, but rather on retention, specifically the retention of those providers who have the firsthand experience treating combat casualties, including not only the surgeons, but also the wound care nurses, therapists, prosthetists, and the other specialists who form the chain between the point of injury and the final return to function. It's been only 3 years since the casualty flow slowed to a trickle, and already many, if not most, of the providers that I worked with during the peak of the war are gone. At this rate, there will be very few of us remaining when the next conflict comes around. I ask now that each of you think about what you would do if your spouse or child were gravely injured in a traffic accident. Without exception, each of you would do your research and you would take them to the best surgeons that you could find. Well, our combat wounded can't choose. They go where we send them. So it's our responsibility to send them to the best trauma specialists that we can. But without aggressively maintaining their skills, who knows how many patients our specialists can optimally treat? Maybe 80%, maybe. But an 80% is a B-. And is a B- really the best that we can do for the young men and women that we send into harm's way to preserve our way of life? No. Our combat wounded deserve A+ trauma specialists, and we're morally obligated to provide them. To do so, we need to maximize our trauma specialists' experience and education and to retain those who've already been through the steep learning curve that we all face when we first learn to care for combat wounded. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my trauma colleagues and the wounded warriors who we serve, I thank you for your time and continued support.
I thank you all for your testimony, and I think it's great as a follow-on to the first panel. We all understand that it's the small amount of care that we provide that's truly trauma care within the military, and as was mentioned, 85% is disease and non-battle injury, which we would expect that most physicians or healthcare providers would be able to take care of through their daily practice and be competent in. That's why I tend to focus more on that other 15% where we potentially see the degradation of skills during the interwar years. and my greatest concern, as has been expressed by this panel, is how do we make sure that the lessons learned over the last 15 years of war don't get lost, or we don't lose those providers who have gained that knowledge as we make sure we're ready for the hopefully never to come next war. And part of that answer has been, well, we rotate folks out to different programs, whether it's C-STARS or down to Miami-Dade or University Medical Center. But I still have the concern that that's not adequately preparing the team in order to respond and be ready to perform. So as those who have worked where the rubber really meets the road, how do you address this issue? How would you propose we ensure that the entire team, from the trauma surgeon to the anesthesiologist to the trauma nurse to the x-ray tech to the phlebotomist, all know how to operate as a team in the stressful situation of that trauma activation, whether it's at an FST or a combat support hospital, soon to be a field hospital? How would you address that problem that I'm fearful we will see over the next decade?
I think it comes back to, do we maintain robust medical ecosystems in our large military treatment facilities? And with that, what I'm trying to say is we must maintain hospitals that have a diverse patient population that is sick, that is complex. And I hear you, Chairman Heck, that I agree, we need to see trauma, but if I put a chest tube in for a trauma patient, or I put a chest tube in for a congestive heart failure patient, my team gets the same experience, and that procedure is a procedure. And so in order to maintain some of the lessons learned and have the best, we need to maintain GME hospitals. And that sometimes has been challenged as well. That costs too. If we ever consider removing GME, I believe that'll be the death knell to our robust hospitals, maintaining those lessons learned, bringing up the next generation of researchers and training our own. I saw the opportunity when I was the chief of emergency medicine down at Wilford Hall. The research we did was in collaboration with NIH and others, and we taught that to our residents. And we were able to teach them the lessons learned. But not only did the residents get it, all the staff would get it. And so I encourage that we look at those platforms and we look at USHUS, our Uniformed Services University, and how do we strengthen with our academic partners in the outside as well.
Colonel Mabry, you alluded to the issues of care from the point of injury to the receiving facility. And so while it may be easier to address some of the training needs within a fixed facility, because a team is a team regardless of the procedure or how the procedure is being performed, how would you address the concerns? Because having the 68 Whiskey respond on post to some medical emergency isn't the same as responding to a battlefield casualty.
Sir, thank you for the question. So what you're getting at, Dr. Heck, is one of the quintessential challenges in military medicine, which is how do you train providers to deal with horrifically injured combat casualties when you don't see horrifically combat injured casualties on a day-to-day basis. So some of that's going to be simulation, some of that's going to be taking care of sick patients with other conditions like Colonel Lawrence has described, but you got to have that exposure. And so one of the challenges with our medics is under the current regimen, the first time they're going to see a seriously injured casualty is when they're on the battlefield. And it may be dark, and it may be shot at, they may be being shot at, and maybe their best friend. So I think we have to figure out ways to expose our medics to critically ill patients before that time. One of the bright spots is the Critical Care Flight Paramedic Program, which we've instituted. That requires medics to gain a civilian paramedic credential and hands-on critical care training in the hospital to be critical care paramedics like you would see on a traditional air ambulance system in the United States. By virtue of that training, they're required to do hands-on patient care, and they're required to see sick patients in the hospital. So it's going to be some mix of simulation, some mix of if you have a civilian credential, you, like some of the doctors do, can moonlight as an EMT. But just seeing casualties every day and seeing patients every day and doing that thinking out in the field with another medic on the ambulance is very valuable, even when you deal with sick trauma patients.
And Colonel Delorand, as an orthopedist, do you believe that being able to take an orthopedic surgeon out of the fixed facility, let's say, has not previously deployed, and then all of a sudden throwing them into an FST, how are we going to assure that that orthopedist is prepared to function as an FST member in a situation similar to the pre-hospital care provider that they never may have been put into previously?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer. The majority of, let's put it this way, there's roughly 130 to 150 orthopods within the Army. Maybe 6 of us, 7 of us are trauma specialists. So the person that you're going to deploy is a total joint surgeon, a sports surgeon, and there really is no effective way to transfer an entire body of knowledge, a career's worth of knowledge to that person. I think that if you retain senior personnel, and if you make, if these people go through their residency programs with senior trauma surgeons who've been there and done that and have had those experiences, and you can bring them up along the way with these life lessons, so it becomes part of what they know about orthopedics, because military orthopedics programs have somewhat of a deployment-related slant in some part of its DNA, regardless of how isolated you are from the war. So I think that that's a key cornerstone, and I think on a systems level, which Dr. Mabry can speak to at length about having a joint trauma system that establishes good clinical practice guidelines and established dogma, that they can at least have an algorithm that maybe not a perfect substitute for being traumatologist at Walter Reed, at least can give them a path towards doing the right thing at the right time.
Great. Thank you. My time is more than expired. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you all very much for being here. I'm going to ask you to do something that's kind of difficult. Could you respond to what you heard earlier in terms particularly of exactly what you just said, Colonel, the systems level organization that is going to give us what's required? You know, to get getting at that question, what is it going to take in order to try and be sure that the skill sets that are going all the way through the nurse specialties, all of the people that are involved in trauma, so that we really maximize what I understand are we actually have 80 trauma surgeons that are certified in this way across the services. Not sure if that's correct, but how you heard, and I tried to ask this question. I'm not sure if I asked it so artfully, but should we be doing more in terms of that more so that we actually do get the best use of the exceptionally well qualified people that we have, knowing that they're not getting the exposure either in the future?
I think it's beneficial to look at it at 3 different levels, the tactical up to strategic level. So myself as a surgeon, there's certain skill sets that I need to have to handle the very broad range of injuries that come back from theater, be it from the upper limits of survivability in terms of multi-extremity amputee, blast wound, open pelvic injuries, to things that more resemble what you would take off the highway. And those sort of ebb and flow over the years. So there's things that can be done for me as an individual, be it working at a civilian trauma center and making it easier for me to continue my own education and ongoing training, which currently I mostly subsidize myself. That only makes me, as one member of the team, proficient. Everyone around me, the x-ray techs, scrub techs, ICU nurses, et cetera, basically go from a civilian setting straight into a war setting with no training if I'm the only one who's trained. So I think making key hospitals that might be expected to see war casualties, making them trauma centers during peacetime or throughout, even in and out of conflict, that makes the whole team more efficiently trained. But then finally on the system level, which again is Dr. Mabry's wheelhouse, I think that's going to be an overriding entity that can at least help establish evidence-based guidelines to help guide our practice.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mabry?
So one of the biggest challenges we have, ma'am, is that unlike the warfighter, when we're home, we're providing health care in our fixed facilities day to day. The warfighter is going to the range and training. And so we're doing our civilian beneficiary mission for the most part, whereas the infantry soldier and the special forces soldier are out training, preparing for the next war. So we have to figure out how to kind of thread the needle where we can maintain our healthcare benefit, but at the same time go to war ready and prepared for the next set of conflicts or next war without a learning period, a learning curve, which is traditionally what happens.
But systems, the systems piece, though, in terms of who organizes, who has the oversight to be sure that things are moving properly. You mentioned, I thought that was, you can't approve what you don't measure. So
Yes, ma'am.
the extent to which there is, whether it's the DHA, where does that system organization lie? And is it there today? Is it being utilized the way that it should? Is it covering all aspects of research and development, or at least aware of it?
Yeah, so that's a challenge where there's some lack of interconnectivity. So in other words, after this war, during the start of this war, a lot of talented surgeons recognized we needed a trauma system. We went to war initially in 2001 without a trauma system. And so it took about 4 years to build the trauma system. That became the joint trauma system, the joint theater trauma system, where we had senior trauma surgeons deployed and conference and advising and coaching, developing clinical practice guidelines, which really you can trace the improvement to our battlefield casualty outcomes to two things. That's one of them. And so the joint trauma system is currently the repository for the system, but that's only in one command. It's only in CENTCOM's AOR, and it's uncertain whether we'll continue to have the joint trauma system as the conflict winds down.
Yeah. Colonel Lawrence.
I'd like to expand on what
I'm
Dr.
sorry, my
Mabry.
time is up. Should we go ahead? Let her. Go ahead.
Just a few of us here, so we can go.
Okay.
Dr. Mabry is correct. That is a very important part, and the joint theater trauma system, it encompasses more than the surgeons. And how are we going to preserve that? There are discussions, I'm told, at the senior level with our MHS senior leaders, and they're discussing that. I think to get back is what you're hearing is there needs to be a value placed on readiness. And my concern, and I've been in for almost 24 years of active duty, is as the conflicts decline, we are going to go back to measuring healthcare competitive with the civilian sector, and we're going to lose that quotient of readiness. And in the healthcare system today, we're shifting away too from looking at productivity to looking at value and value-based care. And I believe that's what we're getting at, is how do we preserve outcomes, not just on the battlefield, but in our MTFs as well. And if we look at the value equation, which is health and care over cost, where do you put readiness? I'd argue readiness needs to be up on the top with health and care. And if we design the system that is going to allow that, because all of us have talked, and we heard the panel earlier, about the need for our people to spend time away. I mentioned that you will never get everything in our military health system. So we need a synergistic system that's going to allow us to spend some time at the C-STARS and smart platforms. But where do you put that if you're going to measure our productivity on what we do in the MTFs? So as we build that system that is sustained and endured, as hopefully the need for conflict declines, we need to say, where is that value equation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to have you all here today. A friend of mine is an Air Force trauma surgeon, reservist. You may know Dr. Joe Hanningman. And we went to high school together, but he shares the thought there was multiple deployments. At first, he used to say, I'm going to try and get you everything here that you would get at home. Now he comes home and says, I'm going to try to get you everything here at home that I would get at one of our troops in theater. And that's how far we've come in the last 10 to 15 years. And I don't think there's been any greater privilege for me in my lifetime as to be any part of that and to take care of our troops. One of the things that I read in my friend Dr. Dalloran's testimony, Hippocrates said, war is the only proper school for surgeons. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's how do we capture all this knowledge and maintain it and share it? And I think we all recognize the dilemmas. It's where do we go from here? First, I'd like to ask Colonel Dallaran, I think you take the opportunity every chance you get when I've seen you at Walter Reed to, with the residents in particular, this is what you do here, but this is not what you would do downrange because it's a different set of circumstances, right? You talk about fungal infections, we talk about open wounds, you don't put a rod in here, this and that. So how much of an opportunity do you get to carry that over and try to make sure that it's sustained in a resident, a new doctor coming up?
We do have it's called the Combat Extremity Surgery course, and it's a joint course that we run with the Navy as well. And so that's taught a couple times a year, typically with upper-level residents or general orthopods who are looking at an upcoming deployment. It's difficult, though. It's a 2-day course, and we teach a lot of sort of doctrine and sort of hard-fought lessons, but I mean, how good can you be at anything in 2 days if you've never really been exposed to it? So it's difficult to communicate that body of knowledge to anyone. Even you know, I trained at shock trauma in Baltimore. I thought I'd seen, you know, the worst energy injuries that you could have, and wasn't even remotely in the ballpark of what we were seeing at Walter Reed. So I don't think there's any way to truly prepare them, but I think having senior faculty who have had multiple deployments, who have had those hard-won life lessons that don't always work out well when you're operating in a tent in the middle of the night, having those guys around, especially during the interwar periods, to impart those knowledges is the best thing you can get to some sort of corporate memory.
And to that point that you've made, there are opportunities to take those that have left wearing the uniform to be part of the teaching process, those that have actually served in combat. I think maybe we need to take a look at that. I really would love all of you to weigh in because we're talking about different ideas of military just providing trauma services like at SAMC, and then also moonlighting. Is there a hybrid out there? I think we need some guidance, and how can we help you here to fulfill that role?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So I was at the Staff College doing a research paper, and I came across a book where they're addressing some of the same concerns following World War II. And they were talking about bonuses for physicians, and then there was a paragraph, the way to keep physicians in the military is to give them meaningful work. And so if you have surgeons that are doing the kind of surgery they like to do on a high-volume basis, what they find meaningful, then that is going to help with retention. With regard to training in civilian centers, I guess I would say if you crash your car and you have to have your spleen removed, do you want a surgeon that's familiar, proficient, or expert in removal of the spleen? And so I think our challenge is how to have toward the expert spectrum, you know, when we go to the next conflict. Because usually, again, there's a learning curve for the first couple of years, and our challenge this time is to go to war next time without a learning curve.
Colonel.
And I would say that learning curve is going to constantly be there because as we have seen the advances that we've had in this last 15 years, I think that's what we're all talking about. How do we preserve that mindset, and how do we preserve the system that allows us to continue to advance? And so, again, I'll go back to the extreme importance you've heard of GME, and not just graduate medical education, but our nurse training programs, our technician training programs. We need to keep that, and that's where we can pass some of these lessons learned. But we need money to continue research, and we need to look at where can we partner with academic institutions and professional organizations to take these lessons learned and continue to grow. How do we sustain the joint theater trauma system? I mean, if we tuck that away in a closet and pull it out, it's not going to be any good, all right? But if we continue, there's a partnership right now with the American College of Surgeons and the MHS, and they're talking about looking at a similar partnership right now with the American College of Emergency Physicians. So where, you know, when we start to bring in the professional organizations, we don't only help our military, we're going to translate those lessons learned into society, and vice versa. We're going to keep that learning cycle going, and we're going to continue those partnerships. So those partnerships, though, cost money. Research costs money, and time away from our clinical practices to engage costs time. But that's what I find when I talk to physicians, particularly emergency physicians, anything they can do which shows value of them and that opportunity to go out there and continue to partner with their colleagues and learn and make the entire system better, that's going to keep them in the suit.
Thank you. I yield back.
Dr. Delaran, I want to ask, when was the last time that you deployed?
I just got back 2 months ago from a deployment to East Africa.
So, as one of the handful of, orthopedic traumatologists within the military health system, now that you're at Walter Reed, which does not receive civilian trauma, how do you envision the ability to maintain your just on a personal basis, your trauma level skills that you've developed over the past several deployments?
It's a problem that I've been struggling with for a number of years now, and so I do a number of things in order to maintain what I consider to be an acceptable level of proficiency. I spend 2 of my weekends a month moonlighting at local trauma centers. I pay my own way to go to trauma courses. I teach at trauma courses. I basically do everything that I can just to try to maintain a certain level. Is it enough? I wish it were more, frankly. It is what it is. And, certainly in the deployed setting, those are always difficult questions because it's always a different experience. I was at a couple different places in Afghanistan, and it's very different if you're operating at a rocket-proof Rule 3 facility compared to operating in flip-flops in a tent that has, helicopter prop wash knocking the tent around. And Africa was very different entirely. So I definitely have used my trauma skill set with specifically for blast wounds, et cetera, on deployment, but deployment also lots of times is where you have intense degradation of your skill set as well, long periods of just disuse and waiting for something to happen too.
So in your opinion, if Walter Reed was integrated into the civilian EMS system as a receiving facility for civilian trauma, similar to Madigan or Brooke, would that help you and others like you be able to maintain your skills to a higher level?
I think without question. If you look at any job, any skill that you can think of, a musician, a professional athlete, et cetera, you would never consider being excellent in that field by dabbling in that field. The weekend athlete is by definition a weekend athlete. So as I said earlier, and it's obviously common sense, if I were to work full-time at a civilian trauma center and be given the opportunity to do sabbaticals and rotate at other facilities where there's regional experts in certain techniques, that would make me ideally suited for my profession, but I would still only be one piece in the big machine. And by opening the doors to key facilities, Walter Reed being one of them, as difficult an undertaking as that may be, that at least gets the entire hospital ready for some measure of trauma. It's not going to necessarily be ready for blast wound, open pelvis, fungus infested. The stuff we were seeing when Helmand Province was really going off in the winter of 10 to 11. But a facility that's used to seeing high energy, constant flow of trauma is going to be the best suited that we could have for that situation.
I appreciate that. And I just want to go back to something that both Colonel Mabry and Colonel Lawrence alluded to, which is, the cost of readiness. And I agree that we cannot compare the military healthcare system to the civilian healthcare system, because you have a unique role and mission to fulfill that the civilian sector does not have. And Colonel Mabry, you said it, when you're back or the medics are back from deployment, they're doing their job in beneficiary care and not necessarily getting the ability to go train like the 11 Bravo does, where their only job is to really train for the next war. And I appreciate what you said, Colonel Lawrence, about our move towards value-based care and where do we put readiness into that equation. Earlier this week we had a briefing from DHA on how they're trying to look at increasing efficiencies and capability in the military healthcare system by increasing hours, increasing throughput. So the balance then we've got to come up with is how does that impact the ability for the military healthcare provider to be able to go do those other things that they need to do to be able to execute their military mission. And so I've always said, and will continue to say, that military healthcare readiness comes with a cost, and we have to be ready to assume that cost if we want to be prepared to go to war, both with a ready medical force and a medically ready combat force. So I appreciate you folks being here. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just really quickly, and going back to you, Colonel Mabry, on the ownership issue that you mentioned, is that in conflict in any way with jointness?
No, ma'am, it's just unique to the battlefield. So,
When we do jointness on the battlefield, I guess I'm wondering as we move to not being on the battlefield.
the point being is outside of the hospital, outside of the combat support hospital, it's the operational commander who owns that real estate. It's the operational commander who owns the medics, the battalion medical officers, the critical care flight paramedics, the flight nurses. They work for the combat commander. But yet we defer medical expertise to the medical departments, but they don't have ownership of those assets. And so there's a friction point there in that we're responsible for developing the doctrine and the training, but the line commander is responsible for the execution. So who owns battlefield medicine is kind of one of our quintessential challenges. And so who's then able to synchronize the data, the training, the research to feed back into the system to improve care? And during this war, it's taken a lot of very strong personalities over a decade to get those systems in place.
But you want the institution to be there to do that.
So how does the institution do that is going to be a big challenge.
What do you think?
I think we need to have a senior person in charge of it. So we have, in the Army Medical Department, we have a Brigadier General that's in charge of veterinary medicine, the veterinary corps. I think combat casualty care would equally benefit from senior leadership, whether that's a line officer or a medical officer. I think that would have to be worked out.
Is there any disagreement with that, Colonel Lawrence? Do you think what would you say?
I'd say one of the things that we need to realize is it's not either or. And sometimes we look at in garrison healthcare, what we deliver in our MTFs and our training and currency that we need there, to what do we need in a deployed environment. And that's our medical readiness training, and that's over here. And we need to say, how is it all one part of the system? Right. And I think, there's different, I can't speak to the Army, I can speak to the Air Force, we respond to the line, and when I was a hospital commander, I worked for a wing commander, a line commander, but they did understand the importance of our training. And so getting back to how do we take and have that system, which is I think what you're saying, we need to stop looking at readiness is a price over here we pay and healthcare is over here, but how are they merged together, and in how do we look at that delivery benefit to have it so that there's a training piece in there that you do in your day-to-day, but there's also a training piece that you're not going to get there, and how do you explain that to the mission commander?
Colonel, did you just want to add anything to that?
I have nothing substantial to add. I think there's definitely precedent.
Thank you. I know, I feel like we've asked the same question in many different ways. I think we're trying to, but we really feel a responsibility to help and get this right.
Ma'am, in the pre-hospital setting, I can point to one Army unit that's done this exceptionally well. That's the 75th Ranger Regiment. When General McChrystal was the Ranger Regimental Commander, he added battlefield medicine or tactical combat casualty care as one of his big 4 command priorities. And since then, the Ranger Regimental Commander has owned that casualty response system, and they have detailed documentation what happens to every Ranger casualty. They're very well trained. Their line leaders, their squad leaders, platoon sergeants, first sergeants are trained in the tactical medical system, and they've been able to demonstrate a remarkable survival rate and exceptional care to all their Ranger casualties because of the commander's ownership of the system.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that even when we look internationally to our partners, our allies, the kind of exchanges that go on, maybe that's another area to look at more in terms of getting that kind of experience. Thank you very much.
Well, again, I want to thank you all, both the first and the second panel, for taking the time to spend with us this morning to provide us with your views on how we can help maintain military medical readiness. It's most instructive, and certainly the comments you made will help inform this subcommittee's decisions as we move forward. Again, I appreciate everybody's participation. There being no further business, subcommittee stands adjourned.